Have you ever wondered what's really going on inside you when you distance yourself from people who no longer value you? What if I told you that this simple act could be the key to unlocking your true potential, spiritually, emotionally, and even physically? Imagine walking away from toxic relationships, those that drain your energy, and instead stepping into a life filled with authentic connections, deeper self-respect, and opportunities that truly align with your soul's purpose. Carl Jung's teachings offer us powerful insights on how to transform this seemingly small decision into a life-altering revelation. But here's the truth. Most people are too afraid to make this move. They stay stuck, trapped in the same unhealthy cycles, because they don't understand the profound spiritual shift that happens when you reclaim your worth and embrace your shadow. Jung's wisdom shows us that distancing ourselves isn't just a necessary step, it's an act of profound self-love. And it's exactly what you need to unlock the next chapter of your life. If you haven't subscribed yet, you're missing out on these life-changing insights. Most people who watch videos like this haven't hit that subscribe button, and I don't want you to be one of them. So take a moment now, hit subscribe, and get ready for a journey that will transform the way you see yourself and your relationships forever. Stay with me until the end, because what you'll learn will give you the clarity, power, and spiritual freedom you've been searching for. Distancing yourself from those who do not value you is an act of self-discovery and renewal. There comes a moment in life when one must step back, not out of bitterness, but out of necessity. To distance oneself from those who fail to see one's worth is not an act of selfishness, it is an awakening. Carl Jung taught that individuation, the process of becoming one's true self, requires peeling away layers of false attachments, personas, and external expectations. When a person continuously tolerates relationships that diminish them, they suppress their unconscious desires, silencing the very voice that seeks self-expression. Walking away is not merely an act of separation, but a movement towards something deeper, the reclamation of selfhood. Yet this decision is never easy. The unconscious collective, the deeply ingrained beliefs and conditioning absorbed from society, whispers that one must endure, that connection at any cost is better than solitude. But is it? Jung reminds us that the psyche speaks in symbols, and sometimes life presents the same lessons repeatedly until one finally listens. If a person feels unappreciated, overlooked, or emotionally drained in certain relationships, it is a signal, an archetypal calling to retreat and reassess. The ego may resist, clinging to familiarity, but the self, the totality of who one truly is, knows better. At first, the act of distancing can feel like an exile, as if stepping into a great void. The shadow, that hidden part of the psyche that houses fears and suppressed emotions, will rise whispering doubts. What if I'm the problem? What if I end up alone? But this is merely the voice of the past, the remnants of old wounds and complexes. One must trust that in the silence of separation, new truths emerge. Without the noise of undervaluation, one can finally hear the rhythm of their own needs, their own desires, their own potential. It is here that the true transformation begins. Active imagination, a Jungian practice of engaging with the unconscious mind, reveals the deep-seated patterns that have kept one bound to toxic relationships. Through introspection, one begins to see the deeper story behind their attachments. Why did they stay? What part of their anima or animus, Jung's concept of the feminine and masculine energies within, was unbalanced? And most importantly, what now seeks to be born from this space of renewal? In time, the distance becomes not an emptiness, but a fertile ground for individuation. Relationships, like alchemical processes, either refine or corrode the soul. One must ask, does this connection bring me closer to wholeness, or does it fracture me further? When one chooses to walk away from what no longer serves them, they are not losing. They are simply making space for something greater. And in that space, the real journey begins. Relationships reflect both our light and our shadows, revealing aspects of ourselves that need attention. Every relationship, whether harmonious or turbulent, acts as a mirror. It does not simply show the surface-level dynamics between two people. It reveals the hidden depths of the psyche. Carl Jung spoke extensively about the shadow, that concealed part of the unconscious mind, where we store our fears, wounds, and unacknowledged desires. When one engages with another, they are not just interacting with an individual, they are engaging with projections of their own psyche. This is why certain people evoke strong emotional reactions: love, resentment, admiration, or frustration. They illuminate aspects of ourselves we have either embraced or rejected. Consider the relationships that have caused the most turmoil. Was it truly the other person's actions that created the distress, or was it something deeper, something within that relationship that forced one to confront their own wounds? If an individual repeatedly finds themselves in relationships where they feel undervalued, is it the external world that fails to recognize their worth, or is it their own unconscious belief in their lack of value that manifests externally? The psyche operates in patterns, seeking repetition until the lesson is learned. Jung called this synchronicity, meaningful coincidences that reflect the inner state. Even admiration is a form of projection. The traits one idolizes in another are often the dormant qualities within oneself, waiting to be claimed. The charismatic leader, the compassionate healer, the fearless artist. These are not merely external figures, but symbols of the untapped potential residing within. Similarly, the qualities one despises in others may reflect disowned aspects of their own psyche. The controlling boss, the manipulative friend, the emotionally unavailable partner, these too are reflections of the shadow, inviting confrontation. The real question is, will one have the courage to look inward rather than simply blaming the external world? Jung's concept of individuation teaches that wholeness comes from integrating both light and shadow. This means owning not just one's strengths, but also their flaws, their insecurities, and the aspects of themselves they'd rather not face. Relationships serve as the crucible for this alchemical transformation. They present an opportunity not to seek perfection in others, but to understand oneself through the interactions they create. To walk away from a relationship that no longer serves them is not just about leaving another person behind. It is about shedding the version of themselves that was willing to accept less than they deserved. And so, the journey continues. Each relationship, whether fleeting or lifelong, offers wisdom. The pain of rejection, the warmth of deep connection, the tension of misunderstandings, all of it is symbolic. It is an invitation to step further into self-awareness. When one understands this, they no longer see relationships as random encounters, but as deeply meaningful aspects of their own psychological evolution. The question is no longer, why is this happening to me? But rather, what is this trying to teach me? Feeling undervalued is a sign of internal imbalance, and ignoring it can harm emotional, physical, and spiritual well-being. There is a particular kind of exhaustion that comes from feeling unseen. It is not the tiredness of the body, nor even the weariness of the mind. It is the depletion of the soul. Carl Jung often spoke of the psyche as a delicate system of balance, where every experience, thought, and emotion contributes to either harmony or discord. When one consistently feels undervalued in relationships, workplaces, or social circles, it is not merely an external issue, it is an internal signal. Something within is out of alignment, and if ignored, this imbalance seeps into every aspect of life, affecting emotional stability, physical health, and spiritual growth. People often assume that being undervalued is a reflection of how others perceive them. But Jung's work on psychological complexes suggests otherwise. A complex is a cluster of unconscious beliefs and emotions, often formed in early life, that dictates how one sees themselves. If someone struggles with feeling unworthy, they may unknowingly seek out situations that reinforce that belief. This is why individuals who feel unappreciated in one environment often find themselves experiencing the same pattern elsewhere, whether in friendships, romantic relationships, or careers. The external world mirrors the inner world, and the cycle continues until one decides to break it. The consequences of ignoring this internal imbalance are profound. Emotionally, it can lead to feelings of resentment, sadness, and self-doubt. Physically, chronic stress from being undervalued can manifest as fatigue, headaches, tension, or even more severe health issues. Spiritually, it creates a disconnection from the self, the core of one's being that Jung described as the ultimate integration of consciousness and the unconscious. The longer one tolerates this disharmony, the more they drift away from their own individuation, losing touch with their purpose, creativity, and inner power. Healing begins with recognition. One must ask, why do I accept less than I deserve? What part of me believes I am not worthy of more? These are not easy questions, and the answers often lie buried deep in the unconscious, entangled with past experiences, familial conditioning, and societal expectations. Jungian techniques, such as active imagination, a method of engaging directly with the unconscious, can help bring these hidden beliefs to light. Mandalas, another tool Jung explored, serve as visual representations of one's internal state, revealing patterns that words sometimes cannot. True transformation occurs when one chooses to realign. This does not mean demanding validation from others, but rather recognizing one's own value, independent of external approval. When a person begins to honor their worth, their energy shifts. They set boundaries with confidence, attract healthier relationships, and most importantly, reconnect with their inner self. And in that space of self-respect, something remarkable happens. The world, as if responding to this new alignment, begins to value them as well. Staying in relationships where you are not valued reinforces the belief that you are not enough. There is a silent erosion that happens when one remains in spaces where they are unappreciated. It does not announce itself all at once. It is subtle, creeping into the psyche like a slow-moving fog. Over time, the mind begins to internalize the treatment received, and what was once an external issue becomes an internal conviction. Maybe I'm not enough. Carl Jung warned of this psychological trap where the persona, the mask one wears to navigate the world, becomes so accustomed to playing a role that it forgets its true identity. When one continues to show up in relationships that do not honor their worth, they are unconsciously agreeing with the narrative that they deserve to be overlooked. The danger lies in repetition. The psyche, in its desire for familiarity, will recreate what it knows, even if what it knows is pain. If a person has learned, whether in childhood, past relationships, or societal conditioning, that their needs are secondary, they will unconsciously seek situations that confirm this belief. Jung called this the power of psychological complexes. A complex is like a magnet, attracting experiences that reinforce its existence. If one believes they must prove their worth to be loved, they will gravitate toward those who require constant proving. If one has internalized rejection, they will find themselves drawn to those who withhold affection. It is not fate nor coincidence. It is the unconscious playing out its unresolved patterns. Breaking free requires more than just walking away. It requires a shift in belief. The external world only mirrors what one holds within. If someone truly believes they are valuable, their energy changes. They no longer chase validation, they do not settle for half-hearted connections, and they no longer explain their worth to those unwilling to see it. This is not arrogance, it is individuation. Jung described individuation as the process of becoming whole, of integrating all aspects of the self, including the parts that have been neglected. This means reclaiming one's worth not through external validation, but through inner knowing. One of the most profound shifts occurs when a person realizes they have a choice. Staying is a choice. Leaving is a choice. And the moment one chooses to no longer engage in relationships that diminish them, something radical happens. The unconscious stops repeating the same painful cycles. This is why some people, after years of unhealthy dynamics, suddenly find themselves surrounded by genuine, nourishing relationships. They did not merely change their surroundings, they changed their internal alignment. And when the psyche no longer believes in its own unworthiness, the external world has no choice but to respond in kind. And so the question is not, why don't they value me? But rather, why do I continue to stay where I'm not valued? The answer to that question is the key to transformation. And once that answer is faced, the journey to self-respect begins in earnest. Walking away is not selfish, but a profound act of self-respect and self-love. Society often conditions people to believe that endurance is a virtue, that staying, even in the face of neglect or mistreatment, is a sign of strength. But Carl Jung would argue otherwise. To remain where one is not valued is not resilience, it is self-abandonment. Walking away from such situations is not an act of selfishness, it is an act of self-respect. It is the moment when one chooses to stop betraying themselves for the comfort of others. And yet for many, the decision to leave comes with guilt, doubt, and the lingering question, am I doing the right thing? The answer lies in understanding the difference between selfishness and self-preservation. Selfishness seeks to take at the expense of others, while self-preservation is the acknowledgement that one's well-being matters. Jung's concept of individuation teaches that a person must integrate all aspects of themselves, their needs, emotions, and desires, to become whole. If one continually sacrifices their happiness to maintain relationships that drain them, they are fragmenting themselves, suppressing their true nature in favor of external expectations. In doing so, they weaken their connection to the self, the deeper, authentic core of their being. Consider this. If one were to encounter a friend who was stuck in an unfulfilling, one-sided relationship, they would likely encourage them to leave, to seek something better. Yet, when it comes to their own situation, they hesitate. Why? Because the unconscious is wired for attachment. It clings to familiarity, even when that familiarity is painful. The psyche fears the unknown more than it fears suffering. Jung called this the power of psychological complexes, patterns of thought and emotion that keep one trapped in cycles of self-doubt and unworthiness. But one does not heal by staying in environments that continue to wound them. One heals by walking away and choosing something different. And when they do, something remarkable happens. The absence of the wrong people creates space for the right ones. The silence left by unhealthy relationships becomes a canvas for new possibilities. At first, it may feel empty, even unsettling. This is the shadow making itself known, the part of the psyche that resists change. But within that void, new energy begins to form. Jung spoke of alchemical psychology, the transformation of the soul through self-awareness. Walking away is the first step in this alchemical process, the necessary dissolving of the old to make way for something new. So, no, walking away is not selfish. It is an affirmation of self-worth. It is the refusal to accept less than what one deserves. It is the recognition that love, real, deep, nourishing love, begins with how one treats themselves. And when a person finally understands this, they do not just walk away from unhealthy relationships, they walk toward something greater, toward healing, toward growth, toward their true self. Jung's concept of the shadow highlights that toxic relationships often mirror our own insecurities. It is easy to point fingers, to label a relationship as toxic and attribute the blame solely to the other person. And yet, Carl Jung would invite a deeper inquiry, one that is far less comfortable but infinitely more transformative. He introduced the concept of the shadow, the unconscious reservoir of everything we suppress, deny, or refuse to acknowledge about ourselves. And here is the difficult truth. The people we struggle with the most often reflect the very parts of ourselves we have yet to confront. Consider the dynamics of a toxic relationship, be it with a romantic partner, a friend, or even a family member. What is it that evokes such strong emotions? Is it their controlling nature, their emotional unavailability, their tendency to manipulate? Now look inward. Where does control show up in your own life? Have you ever withheld your emotions? Have you, even unknowingly, manipulated situations to maintain a sense of security? The shadow is not about blame, it is about recognition. It is about understanding that the traits we despise in others often exist in some form within us. This is why these dynamics trigger such deep emotional responses. They are mirrors, revealing the aspects of ourselves we would rather not see. Jung believed that until the shadow is made conscious, it will continue to direct our lives, and we will call it fate. This is why people find themselves in repetitive cycles, different relationships, same problems. If an individual consistently attracts emotionally unavailable partners, the issue is not merely external, it is internal. Something in their unconscious is comfortable with this pattern, perhaps due to childhood experiences, psychological complexes, or unhealed wounds. The relationship is not just a source of pain, it is a message, a symbolic representation of what needs to be healed within. Healing begins with acknowledgement. Active imagination, one of Jung's most powerful techniques, allows a person to engage directly with their unconscious mind, bringing their shadow into awareness. Mandalas, too, serve as a tool for inner exploration, revealing hidden psychological structures. The work is not about eradicating the shadow, it is about integrating it. When one recognizes their own controlling tendencies, they gain the power to transform them. When they acknowledge their own emotional unavailability, they can begin to open up. The moment a person stops projecting their wounds onto others, their relationships shift. And so, the people we struggle with the most are often our greatest teachers, not because they are inherently wise, but because they reflect the parts of ourselves we must confront to grow. The real question is not, why are they like this? But rather, what is this trying to show me about myself? The answer to that question is the key to liberation, and once we embrace it, we no longer repeat the same painful cycles, we transcend them. We cling to the familiar out, of fear of the unknown, even when it causes pain. There is something deeply paradoxical about human nature. We would rather endure the pain we know than risk the uncertainty of something new. Carl Jung explored this phenomenon through the lens of the unconscious, explaining that the psyche craves familiarity, even when that familiarity is destructive. The known, no matter how painful, offers a sense of security, while the unknown, vast, uncharted, unpredictable, triggers an almost primal fear. This is why people stay in unfulfilling relationships, stagnant careers, and limiting belief systems. It is not that they do not want better, it is that they fear what better might demand of them. Jung described this as the power of psychological complexes, deeply ingrained patterns formed in childhood, shaped by past experiences and reinforced over time. These complexes operate beneath the surface, dictating choices and reactions. A person who grew up in a home where love was conditional might unconsciously seek relationships where they must constantly prove their worth. Someone who was taught that security comes from predictability might resist change, even when that change is necessary. The unconscious clings to what it knows, And until these patterns are brought into awareness, they repeat themselves, shaping one's reality in ways that feel like fate, but are, in truth, self-imposed limitations. This fear of the unknown is further amplified by the shadow, the parts of the psyche that remain hidden, the aspects of ourselves we do not fully understand or accept. Jung believed that people project their fears onto the future because they have yet to integrate their own inner darkness. The unknown becomes terrifying not because it is inherently dangerous, but because it reflects back to us the uncertainties we carry within. This is why stepping into the unknown feels like stepping into chaos. It is not just an external shift, but an internal reckoning. And yet, those who dare to embrace uncertainty often discover something profound: liberation. The moment one stops clinging to the familiar, they reclaim their power. They step into individuation, the process of becoming their true, whole self. Jungian psychology teaches that this is the path to true transformation, but it requires courage. It requires trusting that what lies beyond the familiar is not emptiness, but expansion. It requires faith, not in an external force, but in oneself. So, the real question is not, what if I leave and regret it, but rather, what if I stay and never grow? Because staying in the known does not prevent suffering, it merely ensures that suffering remains predictable. But stepping into the unknown, that is where real change happens. That is where new possibilities emerge. That is where the self is truly discovered. The initial emptiness of walking away can transform into a fertile space for growth and renewal. The moment of walking away often feels like stepping into a void. The mind, conditioned to equate change with loss, resists the silence that follows. The absence of familiar voices, routines, and dynamics can feel unsettling, almost unbearable. Carl Jung spoke of this emptiness as part of the individuation process, a necessary dissolution before transformation can occur. He likened it to the alchemical concept of nigredo, the dark night of the soul, where the old self is stripped away to make space for something new. But in that initial darkness, many hesitate, mistaking emptiness for failure rather than opportunity. This void, however, is not the enemy. It is the fertile ground from which growth emerges. The mind, free from the distractions of unhealthy relationships or stagnant environments, begins to recalibrate. New thoughts surface, unfiltered by the expectations of others. The unconscious, no longer preoccupied with maintaining outdated attachments, starts revealing deeper truths. This is the power of psychological renewal, a process Jung described as the psyche's natural tendency toward wholeness when given the right conditions. But those conditions require space, and space often feels like emptiness before it reveals its potential. Most people, when confronted with this emptiness, rush to fill it. They seek new relationships, new distractions, anything to avoid sitting in the discomfort of their own thoughts. But Jungian psychology teaches that transformation is found in stillness, not avoidance. The archetype of the hermit, present in many spiritual traditions, represents this sacred pause, a time of retreat where one turns inward, allowing the unconscious to communicate through dreams, symbols, and intuition. This is why Jung encouraged practices like active imagination and working with mandalas. They serve as bridges to the deeper self, guiding the individual through the uncertainty of transition. And then, something remarkable happens. The emptiness begins to shift. Where there was once loneliness, there is now self-discovery. Where there was once fear, there is now clarity. New desires take root, ones that are no longer shaped by external pressures, but by inner truth. This is the alchemical process at work. The psyche, once fragmented by external dependencies, begins to integrate, revealing a sense of wholeness that is not dependent on anything or anyone. The individual emerges stronger, not because they have filled the void, but because they have learned to embrace it. So, the emptiness that follows walking away is not the end of something. It is the beginning. It is the space where transformation unfolds, where the old self dissolves, and the true self begins to take shape. But to reach it, one must be willing to sit with the discomfort, to trust the process, and to understand that what feels like loss is, in truth, an opening, and what waits on the other side is not just healing, it is renewal. Choosing self-care leads to self-discovery and attracts healthier relationships. Most people misunderstand self-care. They reduce it to small, surface-level acts, a day at the spa, an occasional break, a fleeting moment of indulgence. But Carl Jung would argue that real self-care is something much deeper, something far more radical. It is the conscious decision to honor oneself, to listen to the psyche, to nurture not just the body but the soul. It is the process of individuation in action, the journey toward wholeness. And when one embarks on this journey, something extraordinary happens. They do not just feel better, they become better, and in becoming better, they attract better. Jung believed that the unconscious mind influences everything, from the way people see themselves to the relationships they cultivate. When someone neglects themselves, they unconsciously invite others to do the same. If they abandon their own needs, they will gravitate toward people who reinforce that pattern. This is why individuals trapped in cycles of unhealthy relationships often find